Hello, and welcome back to Switched In. I am Josh. Today we're going to talk about games that are spooky, but not objectively terrifying that you'll be able to play for your Switch this Halloween. Now here's the thing, it's not that I don't love true horror games that instill an incredible sense of dread or body horror or gore or any of that stuff. It's really spooky if you really get into the Halloween spirit. However, I also have a profound appreciation for games that are more like after-school special horror, right? Things in the vein of Goosebumps. So today, that is exactly the type of video games we'll be talking about. These are going to be 5 different games that you can play for the Nintendo Switch that definitely have a sense of spookiness about them, even creepiness. However, they are not going to leave you with horrifying nightmares, probably, as you pop them into your Nintendo Switch for this Halloween season. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and get the most obvious possible spooky game for the Nintendo Switch out of the way now. I'm not going to do some dramatic build up to this because I feel like it would be a huge letdown, and that, of course, is Luigi's Mansion 3. Now, Luigi's Mansion 3 has been a long time in the making it the first console-specific debut that we've had for Luigi's Mansion since the GameCube's original launch way back in 2001 when we got the first Luigi's Mansion. Then whenever we got the sequel, that wasn't until 2013 on the 3DS. So now we finally have the third entry in the series that came out last year, and it is a wonderful choice for Halloween, filled with exactly the sort of whimsical spookiness that you would come to expect from a series like this. It has a colorful cast of characters, the mechanics are interesting, it has style and humor for days, and a delightfully spooky new locale for you to explore in the Last Resort Hotel, a hotel that initially seems to be an inviting escape for Mario and Luigi and all of their friends to just sort of relax and unwind and have some vacation time together before things obviously take a turn for the incredibly creepy, and Luigi is left trying to track down all of his friends and figure out who is behind all of the spectral madness that's going on within the Last Resort Hotel. I ramped this game up last year, and obviously as a first-party Nintendo offering, you really can't go wrong on the quality front. It's absolutely there. But I would say the thing that I really like about this game most that makes it a good candidate is even if you haven't played the originals, and even if you have no intention of doing so, you can still appreciate Luigi's Mansion 3 on its own merit without necessarily having all the backstory from the first two. The environments are colorful and vibrant, it has an absolutely incredible soundtrack, a familiar and at once not so familiar cast of characters, and the cherry on top is it does have some multiplayer modes as well, so if you want to have some fun with friends, you can absolutely do that with Luigi's Mansion 3. Probably not the most profoundly interesting pick on this list, but nonetheless a pretty safe bet if you're looking for some fun, spooky action this Halloween on your Nintendo Switch, but you don't want something that's overly horrifying because not exactly Nintendo's wheelhouse, historically speaking. And speaking of presentation, the next entry on this list is one that absolutely has style for days, and that would be Flipping Death. Flipping Death is a game that I will absolutely be streaming on my own channel this Halloween, as I have not yet beaten the game. However, I was always intrigued by it ever since I saw the first trailers for it. Flipping Death is a puzzle platformer with a distinctly goth sensibility, and it kind of reminds me of Octopath Traveler in a way in that the graphics are very 2D and flat, but there's some real depth to the environments as well. Throw in a little bit more than a dash of Tim Burton, a colorful cast of quirky characters, and a really fun premise where you play as Penny, a recently deceased girl who has taken over the job of the Grim Reaper, and you've got a recipe for a really fun storybooky style game. Now, while the bulk of your time will be spent doing things like solving environmental puzzles and doing platforming challenges, what makes Flipping Death unique is that, as the name suggests, you have the ability to flip between the world of the living and the world of the dead, which makes for some really interesting puzzle possibilities. Now, as I understand it, the game has been criticized for some mechanical shortcomings, saying that it largely serves as a vehicle to get you to the cast of characters, which are absolutely hilarious. The fact that they were able to take what should be an incredibly dire, horrifying premise and turn it into something kind of lighthearted and fun with a lot of great voice acting is enough to get me sucked in, and definitely a creepy adventure that I think is worth pursuing this Halloween on your Nintendo Switch. So while I haven't had a chance to spend as much time as I would like to with Flipping Death, the next entry on my list also has a wonderful cast of characters, and I actually have beaten this and highly recommend you do so because it actually lends itself very well to some replayability, and that would be Oxenfree. You can make the argument that Oxenfree is also kind of a puzzle platformer, however I will say it leans more heavily on the latter, and ultimately this is more of a graphic novel style game, in so much as a ton of the emphasis is placed on characters, how they develop, and the choices that you make. In the game you'll play as a teenage girl named Alex who basically takes off with her friends to an island getaway for a couple of nights, and then some spooky stuff starts happening and you kind of have to unravel the mystery of what exactly is going on with this island. And one of the things that really stuck out to me about Oxenfree is as you continue to make your way deeper and deeper into the island and start to peel those mysteries back a little bit, all of the dialogue between each of the characters sounds really natural. And I really like the way that they handled having on-screen prompts pop up with speech bubbles so you can choose exactly how you're going to respond in any given situation. And I love that all those responses that you give out aren't necessarily just paper thin. And in fact, depending on some, it can dramatically alter the outcome of the game. And that's pretty great because as soon as you roll credits on this game, you're immediately tempted to dive right back in, play through and see how things would have played out differently had you made some different choices in regards to your friends that you're hanging out with, and the massive shifts in tone that the story can take on account of your actions. And where Luigi's Mansion and Flipping Death have distinctly more vivid colorscapes, this is a little bit more muted in its presentation. But nonetheless, it has an amazing score, and even though the color palette on display here is a little bit more muted, it definitely lends itself well to the atmosphere that they're trying to establish with a supernatural presence that's on the island, and trying to get to the bottom of why it's there and how you tie into its presence. And while we're on the subject of otherworldly presences, I would be remiss not to mention Thumper for the Nintendo Switch. Thumper may not be thought of as conventionally horror or even creepy, but what it is a really unsettling rhythm game. It's kind of weird to explain, but I'm going to do my best. In Thumper, essentially you play as a strange beetle-like character that is racing along at ultra-high speeds through increasingly complex and infinitely unnerving worlds. And making your infinite journey all the more unsettling is the fact that it has a really interesting synth/industrial soundtrack that sort of punctuates all of the action. And the deeper you descend into this weird, twisted, cosmic sort of hellscape, the darker and more foreboding the music gets as you build your way up to a boss battle in each stage. Now the thing about Thumper is this is available on other platforms, and it is incredible on some of those, particularly in VR. However, I will say I think it's particularly well suited to the Nintendo Switch because of its portable nature, and it does take really good advantage of the HD rumble within the Joy-Cons. As you continue to race along each course, you will be forced to take incredibly sharp turns at breakneck speeds, do jumps, slides, and grinds to make sure that you're doing everything in beat with the music, and that will culminate in the attacks that you can dole back at enemies that show up in each one of the courses. It sounds like an incredibly simple premise on paper, and it is. However, there is a whole lot of skill to this, and the game is really good about making sure it gets you right back into the action should you end up failing a particular section of a level. And what you're left with at the end of it all is a hyper-surrealistic rhythm game that feels like you are continually descending into madness. And in a way, I could even make an argument that this kind of toes the line between lighthearted spooky stuff and true horror. Maybe that's a subjective thing to say, you'll have to decide for yourself, but let's assume for a second that I did go over the line, and let's lighten things up a little bit with this final entry, and the last one I will say is Crypt of the Necrodancer. Crypt of the Necrodancer is also a rhythm game, however it is also a procedurally generated roguelike where you have to move in beat to the music, not only for traversing environments, but also performing attacks on a variety of enemies. And while there's definitely something to be said for the inherent violence that comes along with playing a roguelike dungeon crawler, Crypt of the Necrodancer definitely keeps things fun and lighthearted by having all of your enemies also dance in time to the music, which I should point out is one of my favorite video game soundtracks courtesy of Danny Baranowski, and it's got a distinctly colorful retro aesthetic to boot. Now, I will say out of all the spooky games on this list, this is one that I probably would be least likely to play, not because it's a bad game or anything like that, but it is a game that I had so much trouble with because it can get pretty insanely difficult. So depending on how much of a stomach you have for roguelike adventures, you might be a little bit put off by this. But hey, if you want to make sure that the spooky games that you're going to play still have a healthy dose of challenge, you won't have to look far to find that in Crypt of the Necrodancer. Plus, if you're more of a Zelda fan and you're looking for a non-spooky version of this to play, you could always check out Cadence of Hyrule, which I have not played yet, but as I understand it also has a lot of incredible music, obviously inspired by the Zelda series. Alright, so that's it for this video. Again, I just want to run through 5 games that I thought would be kind of fun, lighthearted spooky for you to enjoy for the Halloween season, that won't necessarily leave you completely terrified whenever you try to go to sleep at night and, collapsing on yourself like a dying star, waiting for nightmares to come, because that video will be the next one that I make. But hey, what about you? Have you played all the games on this list, or are there some glaring omissions that I definitely should have had here, but sadly did not? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Switched In. Make sure you subscribe if you're new here and you like content like this, because we usually drop it about once a week. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next time. Bye.